Welcome to HFY Beyond Terra, where humanity doesn't just survive, it becomes the galaxy's biggest surprise. Subscribe, and let's go beyond Terra.
The day the sky split, he found her at the edge of winter. Not the polite winter of postcards, no soft snow and cheerful smoke, but the kind that bit through wool and settled into bone. The pines stood like black spears, and the creek under them spoke in a hard, glassy voice. Elias Cade had followed that creek for hours, tracking the last of his trapland before the storm swallowed the valley whole. He was 32 then, widowed, childless, and tired in a way that didn't leave room for new grief. The colony on Rill, officially Rill 3, Settlement Theta, had been built on promises and ration cards. 20 years earlier, the company had said the world was resource-abundant and stable. What it had been in truth was a rock with too much iron, a stubborn atmosphere, and a sun that played tricks on radio. Elias lived beyond the settlement perimeter because he preferred a roof he'd built himself to the dormitories where everyone listened to everyone else's dreams rot. He made his living with traps, a little hydroponic patch, and repairs that the company didn't have the patience to do. When something broke in the woods, an antenna, a line relay, a generator box, Elias fixed it. He was useful and therefore left alone. That morning, the storm had pushed him farther than usual. He'd cut through the old logging ridges, ancient scars from when the company still pretended to invest in infrastructure, and then down into a shallow ravine choked with fern ice. That's where he heard her. At first, he thought it was an animal, a high, broken sound like a hair caught under brush, but it had rhythm. It rose and fell as if shaped by breath and thought. Elias stopped. The hairs at the back of his neck lifted. In 20 years on Rill, the only crying he'd ever heard in the woods had been his own once after the funeral. He moved carefully, rifle low, boots silent on packed snow. She was under a fallen cedar, half hidden by a curtain of long needles. Pale light filtered through the branches in thin, trembling sheets. She was curled on her side, knees pulled tight to her chest. At first glance, she looked like a child in a torn cloak. Then she shifted, and something unfurled behind her, two shapes folded and trembling. Wings, not feathered like the birds that migrated through Rill's thin summer skies, but membranous and ribbed, like bat wings drawn from some older blueprint. Their edges were frayed and dark with dried blood. One hung limp at an angle that made Elias' stomach knot. Her hair was silver-black, matted with snow. Her skin, gray with a faint blue sheen, caught the light as if it reflected a spectrum humans couldn't fully see. Her eyes were large, and when she looked up, fear flashed through them like a flare. She made a sound that wasn't a word, but Elias felt the meaning anyway. Don't hurt me. He should have turned around, he knew that. The company's rules were clear about non-human contact, even though no one had ever seen anything non-human. The rules existed because the company liked rules. They were a way to keep Hope quarantined, but she was bleeding, and she was crying, and she was alone. Elias set his rifle down in the snow, palms open. "It's all right," he said, voice hoarse from cold. I'm not with them." Her eyes darted to the rifle, then to his face. She didn't relax, but the crying slowed into shallow, shuddering breaths. Elias pulled off his pack and opened it slowly, showing her what he carried: cloth, a tin of antiseptic gel, a coil of line, hard bread. He held up the cloth and pointed to her wing. "May I?" he asked, feeling foolish. "Can I help?" She stared at him as if deciding whether he was real. Then she gave a tiny nod. Elias moved closer on his knees, careful not to loom. The smell hit him first. Not rot, not infection, but something sharp and mineral like ozone after lightning. Her blood was dark, almost purple, and thicker than human blood. He swallowed down the instinctive revulsion and did what he'd done 100 times for his own injuries. He cleaned the wound. He trimmed away torn membrane. He spread antiseptic and wrapped the wing with strips of cloth torn from his undershirt. Her jaw clenched so hard he could see the tendons stand out in her neck, but she didn't scream. Only tears slid down the sides of her face and froze in bright tracks. When he was done, she sagged, exhausted. Elias set the remaining cloth beside her and offered a canteen. She sniffed it, then drank in small, cautious sips. "You're freezing," he murmured. "You can't stay here." She looked at the darkening sky beyond the cedar branches. Something passed over her expression: recognition, dread, and a fierce determination. She pointed east toward the settlement and its perimeter lights. Danger. Then she pointed at herself at the wound and shook her head. Elias glanced at the sky, too. The storm front was thickening, purple and heavy. If he left her here, she would die before nightfall. He made his decision with the same quiet finality he used to set a trap. "My cabin," he said. "I'll take you to my cabin." She watched his mouth as if reading shape rather than sound. Then she nodded once, more firmly. Elias shrugged off his heavy coat and draped it over her shoulders. She flinched at the contact, then clutched it tight. He lifted her carefully. She weighed less than she should have, bones like hollow branches. The wings folded instinctively against her back, one stiff, the other trembling. As he carried her through the woods, the storm began to fall in earnest. Snow erased his tracks before they were a dozen steps old. Ilia's cabin was a practical thing, a square of rough sawn timber with a tin stove, 2 bunks, and a workbench cluttered with salvaged parts. It smelled of pine resin and metal and the faint, sweet tang of dried mushrooms. He laid her on the lower bunk and stoked the stove until the iron glowed. She watched him with unblinking focus. When he turned his back, she tensed as if expecting a blow. Ilias moved slowly, narrating his actions in a calm voice. "Heat," he said, pointing to the stove. "Food." He held up a jar of preserved tubers. "Water." She blinked, and for a moment her gaze softened, as if she understood the concept of kindness but didn't trust its existence. Ilias cut bread into small pieces and set them on a plate near her. He didn't try to feed her. He sat on the stool by the workbench and waited. Minutes passed, then she reached out, took a piece, and ate. Her teeth were small and sharp, but she chewed carefully, almost politely. When she finished, she touched her chest and made a sound. "Sa." It might have been a name. Ilias pointed to himself. "Ilias," he said. She watched his lips and repeated, slightly off. "Elias," he nodded. "Yes, Ilias." She touched her chest again. "Sa, Sa," Ilias echoed. She studied him as if measuring whether he was mocking her. When she decided he wasn't, she relaxed a fraction. Her shoulders eased. Her eyes drifted shut. Ilias didn't sleep much that night. He sat by the stove, listening to the storm claw at the cabin walls and the occasional small sound from the bunk. A sharp intake of breath, a tremor, a whisper in a language that didn't fit human throats. At dawn, the storm had moved on, leaving the world under a smooth white lid. Ilias checked the wing dressing. The blood had stopped. The skin around the wound looked bruised but not angry. That was good. Sa woke with a start, eyes wide, wings half unfurling before pain made her hiss and clamp them down again. Ilias raised both hands. "Easy, you're safe." Safe was a word Ilias had stopped believing in. Still, he said it with conviction because she needed it. Sa's gaze snapped to the cabin window. Beyond it, the ridge line cut the sky like a dark blade. She stared as if expecting something to crest it. Ilias followed her stare. Nothing moved. "Are you running from someone?" he asked. Sa looked back at him. Her expression tightened, and then she pointed at her own wing at the torn flesh and made a slicing motion with her hand. "They did this." "Who?" Ilias asked softly. Sa's jaw worked. Her throat made a sound like a swallowed scream. She looked down, then reached toward the floor beside the bunk where Ilias had dropped his coat. Something shifted beneath it, something hard, angular. Ilias lifted the coat and found a small object, a shard of translucent material like crystal but warmer. It pulsed faintly, not with light but with a sense of pressure like the air before thunder. Sa took it, cradling it in both hands. Her eyes closed, her lips moved in soundless rhythm. For a moment, Ilias felt the cabin tilt. The stove's glow sharpened into a line, the air filled with a humming presence that raised gooseflesh on his arms. Then an image, not seen with eyes but placed directly behind his ribs, a sky full of shapes, a city built of arcs and floating rings. Beings like Sa winged, gray-blue, luminous, moving in flocks across terraces, and beneath it all a sense of distance so vast it made his stomach drop. Ilias jolted back, nearly tipping the stool. "What the?" Sa's eyes snapped open. The humming stopped as abruptly as a cut wire. She looked frightened by his reaction, as if she hadn't meant to push so hard. Ilias drew a slow breath. "You did that," he said, pointing to his head. "You showed me." Sa hesitated, then nodded. "Telepathy." Ilias muttered, though the word felt too small. Sa touched the shard, then made a motion upward with her hand, rising until her fingers trembled at the peak. "Home, far." Then she made the slicing motion again, and her expression turned sharp, taken. Ilias understood enough to feel a cold anger settle in his belly. If the company had found her, he shoved the thought away. The company had never come this far into the woods, not unless something valuable lay here. But Sa had, and she'd been hurt. Ilias stood and paced, boots thudding on wood. His mind ran down the familiar corridors of risk. He could take her to settlement and claim ignorance, but they'd see her wings and lock her up. He could hide her here, but the cabin was too obvious if anyone came searching. He could move farther into the wilderness, but she was injured. Sa watched him, silent. A bruise-colored fatigue clung to her. Finally, Ilias stopped. "Listen," he said, not caring if she understood every word. "If someone is looking for you, they'll follow signs. They'll find this cabin if they want to. I can't protect you if they come with guns." Sa's eyes narrowed at the last word as if she knew it. Ilias exhaled. "But I can keep you alive. I can get you strong enough to leave." Sa stared at him for a long moment. Then she extended her hand, palm up, a gesture that felt ceremonial. Ilias didn't know what it meant. He placed his hand over hers anyway. Her skin was warm despite the cold, as if she carried her own small furnace. The shard pulsed once between them. Ilias felt something lock into place in his chest. Not magic, he didn't believe in magic, but a commitment that didn't ask permission. For months, Sa lived in the cabin. At first, she moved like a cornered animal, flinching at loud sounds, sleeping in short bursts. She ate carefully, as if rationing each bite. Elias never pushed her for explanations. He learned to read her needs the way he read weather, by watching subtle shifts. He built a curtain around the bunk so she could sleep without feeling watched. He cut a slit in the cabin's back wall and built a narrow, hidden crawl space between the timbers. If strangers came, she could fold herself into it with her wings tucked tight. He taught her words slowly: water, heat, pain, safe. She taught him others, though her language didn't translate neatly. One word meant both sky and freedom. Another meant blood and kin. The wing healed not perfectly, but enough that she could extend it without wincing. When spring softened the valley and the air tasted of meltwater, Sa stepped outside for the first time without fear. She stood in the sunlight, eyes shut, face tilted up. Her wings unfurled slowly, catching the light in translucent bands. The membranes shimmered with an internal pattern, fine lines like circuitry, as if biology and technology had braided together. Elias watched from the doorway, feeling a pang he couldn't name. Sa opened her eyes and looked at him, and for the first time she smiled. It was small, tentative, but it split something inside Elias that had been hard for years. Then the smile vanished. She looked past him toward the distant settlement, and the air shivered. Elias felt it too, a low, sub-audible vibration that set his teeth on edge. He turned, scanning the trees. Nothing. Sa's wings snapped half-closed. Her body went rigid. Sa, Elias said. She grabbed the shard from where it hung on a cord at her throat. Her eyes were suddenly bright with terror. In Elias' mind, a word appeared like a knife thrown into wood: seekers. He didn't have time to ask how she knew. He didn't have time to doubt. He moved fast, grabbing his rifle, his pack, the emergency rations. Crawl space, he said, pointing. Sa shook her head violently. She pointed at Elias, then at herself, then made the slicing motion. No, not slicing. Severing. If they find you with me, they will cut you too. Elias swallowed. I'm not leaving you. Sa's jaw clenched. She pressed the shard to her sternum and closed her eyes hard enough to wrinkle her brow. The air thickened again, humming. Elias felt the cabin dissolve around him for an instant, felt the whole valley mapped like a grid. He saw in that internal vision 3 points of movement far to the east, cutting through the forest with mechanical precision. Not people. Drones. The company didn't have drones that moved like that. Sa's eyes snapped open. She grabbed Elias' wrist. Her grip was strong, startlingly so. She pulled him toward the back wall, toward the crawl space. No, Elias began. Sa stared into his eyes, pleading, and then carefully she pushed a thought into him, small, controlled, a memory that wasn't his. A flock of winged bodies falling through red sky pierced by lines of light. A city ring cracking apart. Sa running, bleeding, clutching the shard. The Seekers, sleek, faceless machines, sliding through corridors, harvesting survivors. Elias' stomach turned. He understood with sick clarity that whatever hunted Sa was not the company. It was worse. He nodded once. All right, he said. All right. Sa shoved him into the crawl space first. Elias barely fit, pressed between cold timber and hidden earth. Sa folded in after him, wings compressed with practiced agony. She pulled the panel closed. Darkness swallowed them. Above, the cabin creaked. Then the hum came again, stronger, vibrating through the wood. Elias held his breath. He heard a soft tap, tap, tap on the roof like metal claws testing. A thin beam of light cut through a crack. It swept back and forth. Sa pressed herself against Elias, shaking. Elias felt helpless rage rise in him. He clutched the rifle, though it was useless in a space where he could barely aim. The beam paused. A sound followed. No voice, no language, just a tonal sequence that made Elias' head ache. It wasn't sound alone. It carried intent, probing. Sa went still, her eyes closed. Elias felt her mind brace like a muscle. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the hum shifted, faltered. A new tone sounded uncertain. And then, abruptly, the tapping stopped. The hum receded, minutes passed. Elias didn't move until he felt Sa's shaking ease. When she finally opened the panel and crawled out, the cabin looked unchanged. No scorch marks, no broken locks. But Elias felt the violation like fingerprints on his throat. Sa stood, wings drooping. She stared at the shard as if it had betrayed her. They'll come back, Elias said quietly. Sa nodded. She looked at him with an expression so heavy it made him want to look away. I can't stay. Elias' throat tightened. Where will you go? Sa lifted her chin toward the sky. Home, or what's left. Elias took a step toward her. Can you take me with you? Sa's eyes widened. Then slowly she shook her head. Not yet. Elias' hands curled into fists. Then what am I supposed to do? Just wait. Sa approached him. She placed her hands on either side of his face, fingers cold and gentle. Her eyes held his like anchors, and then she gave him a thought clear as speech. Live, build, be ready. Before Elias could respond, she stepped back, unfurled her wings, and leapt into the clearing. For one terrible second, she dropped. Then the membranes caught the air, and she rose, beating upward in strong, rhythmic strokes. Elias watched, frozen, as she climbed above the tree line. Sunlight flashed through her wings, turning them into stained glass. She circled once, as if marking the place in her mind. Then she flew toward the mountains and vanished. Elias stood in the clearing until night fell and the stars sharpened like nails. The company came 2 days later, not with drones, not with seekers, but with 3 men in gray jackets and a woman with a tablet. They rode a crawler that spat mud and exhaust into the spring air. Elias met them outside the cabin, rifle slung over his shoulder in a way that said, "This is my home and you are guests at best." "Elias Cade," the woman said, reading from her tablet. "You've been flagged for perimeter anomalies." Elias kept his face blank. "I don't know what you're talking about," she smiled thinly. "We have recorded unusual energy signatures in this region. You run equipment out here." "I run a stove," Elias said, "and a soldering iron." The men behind her shifted, hands near their sidearms. The woman's smile didn't change. "We'll conduct an inspection," she said. Elias could have refused, but refusal was a flare, and he'd learned, living under the company, that flares attracted predators. He stepped aside. "Go ahead." They searched the cabin. They found nothing. Saw had taken the shard. Elias had burned the bloody cloth. He'd scrubbed the floorboards until his hands cracked. The woman's tablet pinged occasionally, as if frustrated. After an hour, she turned to Elias. "Have you seen anything unusual in the woods? Any wildlife anomalies?" Elias shrugged. "I see wolves. Sometimes I see nothing for days." Her eyes sharpened. "If you observe anything outside normal parameters, you're required to report it." "Sure," Elias said. They left, dissatisfied. Elias watched the crawler disappear down the ridge, and he knew with cold certainty that this wasn't over. So he did what Saw had put into his mind, build. He expanded the crawl space into a tunnel that led into the hillside. He reinforced the cabin walls with salvaged plating. He built a hidden radio array tuned to frequencies the company didn't use. He didn't know who he was trying to contact, Saw her people, the void itself, but the act of calling felt better than silence. He also began to travel. He went into settlement more often, trading repairs for parts, listening in taverns for rumors. He heard talk of lights over the mountains, of animals found without blood, of miners who vanished from a shift and returned days later with no memory and burned eyes. The company dismissed it. The company dismissed everything until it was too late. Elias didn't. He wrote notes. He mapped sightings. He learned the company's patrol routes, the weak points in their sensors. He taught himself to jam cheap cameras with bursts from improvised transmitters. He trained his body running ridges, chopping wood until his shoulders screamed, because he remembered how easily Saw had lifted him and he hated the weakness he'd felt. Years passed. Rill's seasons cycled like a slow machine, bright short summers, brutal long winters. The settlement grew, then stagnated. The company shipped ore out, shipped supplies in, and kept everyone under a thumb made of paperwork and fear. Elias kept building. His cabin became a bunker disguised as a cabin. His tunnel became a small network. He stored food, medicine, batteries, spare filters. People in the fringe started to come to him quietly, asking for fixes, for advice, for rumors. He didn't start a rebellion. He wasn't romantic, but he became something the company disliked, a node they didn't control. Sometimes, on clear nights, Elias climbed to the ridge and stared at the stars until his eyes watered. He never saw again, not in flesh, but in dreams, yes. In moments of sudden pressure behind his ribs, as if a distant hand touched his mind and withdrew. In a word that would appear unbidden when he almost gave up, ready. 20 years after the day he found her, the sky split. It began on a morning that looked ordinary, gray light, thin frost on the grass, the settlement's air siren wailing its daily shift change. Elias stood outside his cabin, tightening a bolt on a wind turbine blade when the air changed. Not colder, not warmer, heavier. Birds, small, sharp-beaked things that nested in the pines, burst from the trees in a frantic cloud. The wind died as if holding its breath. Elias felt his skin prickle. He looked up. At first, there was nothing but cloud. Then the clouds parted, not pushed aside by wind, but peeled open as if the sky were fabric being torn by invisible hands. A line of light appeared, razor-thin and impossibly straight, stretching from horizon to horizon. For a heartbeat, Elias thought his eyes were failing. Then the line widened, and through it came ships. Not a handful, not a fleet in the human sense. An armada that made the settlement's tiny cargo landers look like insects. They emerged in disciplined formation, each vessel shaped like a crescent blade, dark and glossy, with luminous veins running along the hull like living circuitry. Smaller craft swarmed around them in spirals, winged silhouettes against the bright rupture. The sound reached Elias seconds later, a deep harmonic thrum that vibrated through ground and bone. The settlement sirens changed pitch, panicked. People poured out of buildings, pointing upward, shouting. The company's perimeter lasers, anemic deterrents meant for wildlife, powered up and traced thin red lines into the air, meaningless against the cosmic presence above. Elias didn't move. He stared, breath shallow, heart hammering. He knew without needing proof. Saw. A new sound rolled across the valley, broadcast on every frequency at once. It wasn't human language, it wasn't even sound exactly. It was an ordered cascade of tones that carried structure the way mathematics did. Then abruptly it shifted. A voice shaped in human phonemes with careful precision boomed from settlement speakers and Elias' hidden radio array alike. Inhabitants of Rill 3, do not engage, do not fire, remain stationary. People froze, some screamed. A few fired into the sky anyway, small, futile bursts. The largest crescent ship rotated slowly, aligning itself above the settlement like a blade poised over a throat. And then Elias heard her, not from the speakers. Inside his mind, soft and unmistakable, Elias. His knees nearly buckled. He gripped the turbine post until his knuckles whitened. You lived, the thought continued, threaded with something like warmth. Elias swallowed hard. Sa, he whispered aloud, though there was no one to hear him. Not Sa, she answered gently. That was my child name. Images flooded him, controlled and clear this time. Sa older, taller, wings broader and lined with faint scars, standing on a platform of shining metal. Behind her, others like her moved with purpose. Her eyes were the same, but harder, forged in years of war. My true name is Sareth, she said, but you may call me what you called me. It anchors me. Elias' vision blurred. Why are you here? A pause, and beneath it, the faint rumble of ships settling into position, because the Seekers came to this world. Because the company invited them with its greed, because I could not let them harvest you. Elias' blood ran cold. They're here on Rill. They have been here, she said, for years, quiet, feeding. Elias thought of the miners with burned eyes, the drained animals, the missing shifts. He clenched his jaw. Then burn them out. Sareth's presence sharpened. We will. A smaller craft detached from the armada and streaked downward, trailing light like a falling star. It slowed as it approached the valley, hovering over the tree line near Elias' cabin. A hatch opened. A figure dropped, wings flaring in a controlled descent. She landed in the clearing with a soft crunch of frost, straightening in one smooth motion. Sareth looked much like she had, and nothing like she had. Her wings were vast now, layered with subtle reinforcement ridges that seemed grown and engineered at once. She wore a harness of dark material that clung like living armor. A faint glow traced her collarbone and wrists, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. Her eyes found Elias immediately. For a second, neither moved. Then she stepped forward, closing the distance with the confidence of someone who had survived the universe. Elias managed one word, thick with 20 years of unsaid things. You came back. Sareth's mouth curved, not quite a smile, but something close. I promised, she said aloud, her accent strange but understandable. In the only way I knew. Elias stared at her, anger and relief tangling in his chest. You left me. Sareth's eyes softened, and something like regret flickered. If I stayed, you would have died. If I stayed, they would have found my signal and followed it to you. I chose distance, and I hate that choice. Elias looked past her to the sky. The armada hung there like judgment. What happened to your people? He asked. Sareth's gaze lifted too. We were broken, she said. Our ring cities fell, our flocks scattered. The Seekers learned to follow our minds across the dark. We became refugees in our own sky. She turned back to him. But we learned, we adapted, we built with what we had, we found others the Seekers had hunted, we made alliances. Elias heard it then beneath her words, the scale of it. A war not of nations, but of species, a long chase across starfields. And now, Elias said, voice low, you have a fleet. Sareth's wings shifted, casting a moving shadow over the clearing. Now we have enough. A sharp tone cut through the air, a signal from above. Sareth's head tilted, listening to something Elias couldn't hear, her eyes narrowed. They are waking, she said. Elias felt the air thicken again. The forest went unnaturally quiet. Then from the direction of the settlement, a column of light erupted, thin, white, and violent. It punched upward like a spear. The company's perimeter lasers fired wildly. People screamed. Elias' jaw tightened. That's them. Sareth nodded once. Yes, she lifted a hand. The air around her shimmered, and for a heartbeat, Elias saw the faint outline of a sphere, a field, perhaps a protective layer. Above, the armada moved. The crescent ships rotated in unison. Their luminous veins flared brighter, like lungs filling with light. Smaller craft formed tight swarms. A voice boomed again from the settlement speakers, calm and cold. Seeker presence confirmed. Engagement protocol initiated. The sky split wider. Not physically, space itself seemed to peel, allowing the alien fleet to reposition with impossible smoothness. It was less like flight and more like rearrangement, as if they were pieces on a board that ignored the rules of distance. Then the first strike came. It was silent, at least to Elias' ears. A beam of dark light, if such a thing could exist, lanced from a crescent ship and hit the column rising from the settlement. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the column buckled, twisting as if squeezed by an invisible fist. The white light turned violet, then shattered into a spray of sparks that rained down like burning pollen. A shockwave hit the valley seconds later, flattening grass and making Ilias' teeth clack. He staggered, catching himself. Sareth didn't move. Her field held steady. More columns erupted, 3, 5, around the settlement perimeter, each marking a hidden node the Seekers had built beneath human feet. The alien fleet answered with precise, surgical violence. Beams struck. Columns warped and died, but the Seekers fought back. Shapes rose from the ground, sleek black forms like knives with no handles. They moved in impossible angles, darting upward toward the Armada. They didn't fly so much as skip, blinking from point to point, leaving afterimages in the air. Ilias watched, horrified and fascinated, as the sky became a battlefield. Sareth's gaze remained locked on the settlement. "This is why I came down," she said, voice taut. "Not to watch, to end it." Ilias turned to her. "Tell me what to do." Sareth looked at him then, and something in her eyes softened again, recognition of the man who had wrapped her wing with his undershirt. "You already did it," she said. "You built, you endured, you became a signal I could find without the Seekers tasting it." Ilias frowned. "I'm just a man in the woods." Sareth stepped closer, lowering her voice. "No. You are the reason I remembered what mercy felt like when everything else became war." Ilias' throat tightened. He looked away, embarrassed by the weight of it. Another shockwave rolled through the valley. The settlement's main tower, company headquarters, began to glow at its base as a Seeker node beneath it ignited. Sareth's expression turned cold. "There," she said. "Their core, they nested in your master's foundation." Ilias felt grim satisfaction. Of course they had. Predators always built their dens where the fat prey felt safest. Sareth lifted both hands now, palms outward. Her armor veins flared. The air hummed so hard Ilias felt it in his organs. Above, one of the largest crescent ships shifted position, aligning directly over the headquarters tower. A voice, Sareth's, layered with the fleet's broadcast, thundered through the valley. "Seeker core identified, purge authorized." Ilias squinted as the ship's veins blazed to near white. The sky around it shimmered. Then a column of light fell wide, bright, and clean. It struck the tower. For a fraction of a second, the structure remained intact, outlined in brilliance. Ilias saw every window, every beam, every bolt. Then it turned to dust, not rubble, not flame, dust as if erased from the world's ledger. The ground shook. A rush of hot wind slammed into the forest. Ilias raised an arm to shield his face. When he looked again, the tower was gone. In its place was a smooth depression, glassy and steaming. The remaining Seeker shapes in the sky faltered. Their movements became erratic, like insects whose hive had been drowned. The alien fleet pressed the advantage. Smaller craft swarmed them, emitting pulses that made the black forms stutter and collapse inward, folding into themselves until they vanished. Within minutes, the battle was over. The Armada held position, immense and patient. Smoke and dust drifted over the settlement. Ilias stood in the clearing, breathing hard, as if he'd fought with his own hands. Sareth lowered her arms. The glow in her armor dimmed. She looked at Ilias. "It is done here," she said. Ilias stared toward the settlement where tiny figures moved in panicked clusters. "And what happens to them?" Sareth's expression was unreadable. "They will live," she said, "unless they choose otherwise." Ilias turned back to her. "What happens to you?" Sareth's wings shifted. "We continue," she said simply. "The Seekers are not ended everywhere, but this world, this nest, has been cut away." A bitter laugh escaped Ilias. 20 years, and the company never knew what they were sitting on. Sareth's gaze sharpened. "Some of them knew," she said. "Not all ignorance is innocent." Ilias looked at her, really looked, taking in the scars, the contained power, the careful control of someone who could break minds if she let herself. "You're different," he said quietly. Sareth's eyes softened again, and her voice dropped. "I had to become different to survive," she said, "but I kept one thing unchanged. I kept the memory of a man who saw a creature in pain and chose to help." Ilias swallowed. "I didn't do it for a grand reason." "I know," Sareth said. "That is why it mattered." Silence settled between them, heavy with the weight of years. Above, the Armada's presence turned the daylight strange, as if the sky had learned a new shape. Ilias finally asked the question that had haunted him for 2 decades. "Did you ever think of coming back sooner?" Sareth's jaw tight. "Every day," she said. "But the Seekers tasted longing. They followed it. I learned to starve them of my wants." She reached up, fingers brushing the scar line along her wing's edge. "When I was strong enough to return without leading them to you, I did." Ilias nodded slowly, feeling something unclench in his chest. Sareth stepped closer. Her hand hovered near his shoulder as if unsure whether touch was allowed after so much time. Ilias made the decision for her. He placed his hand over hers and squeezed, steady. Her eyes closed briefly. When she opened them, they glimmered with something that wasn't tears but could have become them if she'd been less armored. "I have a choice to offer you," she said. Ilias' pulse quickened. "What kind of choice?" Sareth tilted her head toward the ship hovering beyond the tree line. "Come with me," she said. "Leave this company, leave this world that uses you. We can use hands like yours, minds like yours. We do not waste the ones who build." Elias stared, stunned. The thought of leaving Rill, leaving the cabin, the woods, the grave he'd dug for his wife beneath the birches, hit like a sudden drop. "And if I say no?" he asked, voice rough. Sareth's expression remained steady. "Then I will respect it," she said. "I will leave you tools, protection, a way to speak to me if the sky threatens again." Elias looked toward the settlement, toward the people he didn't like but couldn't entirely abandon. He looked toward the woods that had kept him alive. Then he looked back at Sareth, the impossible girl he'd carried through a storm. He felt his age in his joints, his years in the calluses on his hands. He also felt a fierce, stubborn flame that had never gone out, only learned to burn without light. 20 years ago, he said, I made a choice in the snow. Sareth watched him, silent. Elias took a slow breath. "I'm tired of surviving," he said. "I want to build something that lasts." Sareth's wings unfurled slightly, as if in relief. Elias glanced up at the torn sky, at the armada that had made daylight look small. "All right," he said. "I'll come." Sareth nodded once, solemn and satisfied. She turned toward the hovering craft and extended her hand, offering it to him like she had in the cabin long ago. Elias took it. Her grip was warm. As they walked into the clearing and the ship's hatch lowered like a dark wing, Elias looked back one last time at his cabin, a square of wood and stubbornness on a harsh world. Then he faced the sky that had split and stepped into the future.